Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Awesome. So I'm super excited for my guest today. So why don't you kick us off? Tell us who you are, what you do, and just give us your intro.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So my name is Duane Laflotte. I've been in offensive cybersecurity for well over 2 decades. So I'm the sort of boogeyman of the internet people hire to break in all sorts of weird ways. So that's sort of my background. And I've worked with Fortune 500s and military and lots of named companies I can't tell you about, or, I'd have to kill you type.
Right. Awesome. So where do you want to start?
Oh my God.
We talked before, a couple weeks ago as our intro, and you had all these amazing fun stories that we could talk through. So why don't you talk about, some of the more recent, maybe exciting examples of what you do and what that means?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, and it's a weird job because seriously, it's odd. Like my partner in crime, who is the founder of the company, is a West Point graduate. So he thinks very much physical security.
Sure.
Okay, how could I attack this building, right? And that was taught into them is okay, how do you defend a post? Well, you know how to defend a post by understanding how to attack it. And the military came up with this term, red team, right? Where it's your own team attacking you so that you get better at defending. And we follow that same paradigm in cyber, but rather than being trained by West Point, I was trained by the hard streets of the internet in the 90s, right? So my job is to sort of take all the technology that somebody has very carefully, sometimes very, skillfully stacked together to make business work, and then tear it apart piece by piece and understand how to slip through the cracks. And that it moves in so many different directions, and it's so fast. This world, we're constantly adding things to it. Like, oh, my refrigerator needs to be on the internet for some ungodly reason. Our fish tanks need to be on the internet. And
right.
That opens up a ton of what we call surface of attack. So, I'll give you an example. We had one organization we were attacking, and they knew we were attacking it, right? Of course they did, right? There's 2 different situations in, a red team engagement with what we do. It's a full-on attack. It's very much like a nation state would attack.
Sure.
So what we do is everything, and this may sound super creepy, and I think you and I were talking about this before. It's like you're the weird stalker guy.
Right.
But, we go through and we say, okay, who are the people who work at the company? And, let's find out information about them and find out where they live and find out what car they bought and find out how much their house is worth and find out how many kids they have and find out what schools the kids go to. Because this type of information would give us really good fishing, bait, where we could say, okay, I'm going to use all of this crafted information. One of the companies we were attacking said, you know what, we want you to do the full social thing. Fish them. They're all trained. They're really good. We said, great. We did a full workup. And this Fortune 500, you would know this company.
Sure.
We did the full workup and we said, okay, cool. And they said, the only thing we ask is that you pass this email by us first before you send it out. We said, okay, great. This is going to be spear phishing. It's going to be against your human resources lady, right? And they were like, okay, cool. And we sat down with this email. We went away for a couple of days. We came back and we sat down with this email. We said, hey, listen, we know exactly where she lives. We know that she bought this Dodge Durango. And we know that the Durango was purchased about 6 years ago. Here's the VIN number of her Durango, and here's all the recalls on her Durango. So here's what we've done. We've created a malicious Word document with actually her Durango VIN number in there, but it has quote unquote encrypted text, and she has to click a button in the document to decrypt the, hey, here's the coupon to get these updates for your Durango for free. We're going to route it off of a service center that we know we can route through that
right.
looks like a Durango service center. And, we're going to see if she clicks on it. He's like, no, you can't do anything like that. No, he's like, that's way too personal. You pulled all of this information about her. He's like, we were like, all right, our second campaign for her was, we know her kids go to this school. So we found out the names of her kids and that sort of stuff and the ages. And we found out one of the teachers' names. So we're going to send an email looking like we're coming from the state about an issue with the child. And he's like, no, you can't do that either. What are you guys doing? And we're like, listen, this is what the nation states would do. Like, all this information is out on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. So, and they were like, you know what? Let's just focus on the digital stuff. Let's not.
So on that, I don't want to do that anymore. Just stop. But it's amazing because people don't think about that. And the whole point of what red teaming, what you guys do, is to really shine a light on, I've got, especially these Fortune 500 companies, they've got these big organizations and they've got the most expensive firewalls and they're in AWS and they've got all the tools and all the fanciness. And those are not the things that get them. It's because somebody clicks on a link or they bring in a USB drive that they found in the parking lot or that they won at, a conference and they plug it into their system. Like those, it's the basic capabilities that get in the door. And then once they're in, then they pivot from there, et cetera, right? But it's important for people to understand, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. Like even me, like as a cyber professional, I think I do a pretty good job, but I also know that I'm not unhackable. I know that even though I have, passwords that are this long and every password is unique characters and randomly generated and all those types of things, that does not make me bulletproof. And I have to compartmentalize myself to understand, okay, if that thing gets attacked, I need to be able to notice it happen so that I can then take action before it spreads to everything else.
Yes. Yeah. And that's another tough part is the noticing it happened.
Right.
Like a lot of people, especially large organizations, you have a lot of moving parts. And generally, security is not dubbed a feature. And companies are looking for features. Right? How fast can we process transactions? How many customers can we handle on the website? None of that is, okay, well, will we notice if somebody, is curb roasting our users on the inside of the domain, right? A lot of people don't care about that. They're like, okay, what's the off chance that some hacker is going to be in the network doing that type of an attack? Whereas, we make money doing these other things. And, it's interesting. Two of the guys on my team used to be blue team for a $22 billion pharma company.
Right.
And they literally would acquire other small pharma companies. And one of the small pharma companies was just a soup sandwich. We're talking like Windows XP for all the desktops, like no patch, just terrible.
Yeah.
And they came in, obviously, security architect, and they said, scorched earth, we should burn the whole place to the ground and rebuild it.
Right.
And the answer came back was, no, they make a ton of money. So don't touch it. Leave it be. And they're like, yeah, but if they get attacked, and they're like, if they get attacked, we can afford to probably pay to fix it. And it's like, so that mentality is it's tough to push against from a security standpoint.
And we see that a lot in the OT space, right? Is because a lot of these environments they've been built, 50 years ago. The life cycle of assets are really designed on a 10 to 20 year life cycle instead of in the IT where it's, 3 to 5. It's probably even 1 to 3 now, right? And so they're not designed to replace them. And these systems are super complex and there's a bunch of things that goes into it. It's the same reason why mainframes still exist in a lot of these systems, from banking to government, et cetera, right? It's because it's so ingrained and embedded in all these subcomponents and processes and everything else. You can't rip it out because it breaks. Nope. And it's not because they haven't tried, because they try and they continually try and they add on these other things. But every time they try to turn it off, they find these other things that are still working on it. Okay, let's just keep it running.
Yeah. And what's funny? That paradigm plays even in large organizations, but not with systems, but like with accounts. Like I've seen like Fortune 500s where we go in there and we're like, hey, this developer account is actually a global admin everywhere. And they're like, yeah, he hasn't worked here for 12 years, but every time we disable his account, like the whole place is on fire. So we're just going to leave it enabled. And we're like, dude, that's terrible. You can't do that. And they're like, no, it's fine. It's okay. He was a good guy. And I'm like, okay, $5 wrench. I bet he gives anybody that password.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And it all crumbles, right? It's so the facade of security and the fact that, I know it's getting better and the message is getting out there that you can't stop an attack. Like the goal is to make it hard, to slow them down. It's just like I put a lock on my door. You can't see it, but I've got a lock on my door here. And that lock is it's not unbreakable. It's actually got a glass in the door. So, I mean, it's not going to really stop somebody that actually wants to get in. They can drive a truck through it. They can take a hammer. They can get a drill. There's all sorts of ways in this room. It's just to slow them down. So my dogs start barking. So I get them on camera, like all of these other security in depth, right? I have to have all these other things that I can do. And then, but at the same time, if I have all those things, and I don't have a camera or I don't have a security system and I don't notice it, then I come back in 2 weeks and everything in my house is gone because
Right.
All of those other things didn't matter because I wasn't here to respond in time to do anything about seeing that thing happen.
Yeah, and that paradigm of security in depth and to some security by obscurity. And I know we as security experts are always like, don't use it, don't obscure your ports. Like, oh yeah, 1433 is a known SQL port. Change it to 1533 and nobody will know, right? And, most people are like, oh, that's garbage. Don't do it. And coming back to the sort of physical security, right? Yeah. So businesses do need to think in defense in depth, and they've done it in the physical world, right?
Yep.
You have out in front of most large organizations in public buildings, you have bollards. Those are those pillars out in front, right? Why are those there? It's just somebody can't drive through the front door. And then you have guards and you have cameras and you have key cards, right? So they have the security in depth. But then we see, in the digital realm, right, it just all falls apart. They go, we got this one firewall, that's it. Then we're back to like a castle with one moat and nothing else. And that doesn't make sense. But the other thing is like security from, through obscurity can also be a layer in the defense. My partner always says like, listen, the military has defense in depth all over the place, but they also don't paint the tanks pink because you can see them, right? So they're going to paint them a color that's going to hide. So that is obscuring, right? But so there is a benefit to using that as part of your defense. You just need to now use that digitally as well. So yeah, it's pulling people out of that paradigm. The other thing we know, coming back to like older systems, a lot of times when we're auditing school districts and where we're auditing medical facilities, specifically medical facilities, but sometimes school districts, a lot of times it's, hey, this is what was sanctioned from the school district, so we need to leave it. Passwords, for example. I don't know if you've run into like, okay, so our world, passwords is such a hot topic, right? Yeah. Like, everybody should have a password manager until the password manager gets breached and they go, don't have password managers. And so, we should go passwordless. And then people go, no, that's not the right answer. We need passwords. So whatever. But when you run into bureaucracy that mitigates password security, that's where I take sort of umbrage. Like in a school district, they go, oh, well, a student's password, the minimum length for a student's password, and this is legit in some school districts, a minimum length for student password is 1 character. I was like, 1 character? Like I could guess, exactly. Like I could take a student account and guaranteed, a majority of the students are going to make the minimum password. And so I'll just walk the keyboard and, in, I don't know, 70 or 80 guesses, I'm sure I'm going to get it.
Sure.
And that's just, they were like, hey, listen, it's easier for the students and this is what we should do. But there again, in defense in depth, there's nothing else monitoring like, oh, hey, this student was just, in downtown Boston and logged in from St. Petersburg. That's fine, right? Yeah. That's normal. So, it's those types of things we need to, mitigate. But then come into the medical world, and you probably see this, you're talking about with OT all the time. Like they'll have an MRI machine that's like state of the art. And then you'll see, like, you look over at the computer that's running it, and it's like a Windows 7. And you're like, what is this? And oh, yeah, that was sanctioned by the company. You're like, you can't touch that. That's not ours. It runs, and it's like, it's horrible. Like, that is scary, especially with something like as powerful as either like an X-ray machine or an MRI machine. Like, there's all sorts of weird stuff there. So,
well, and, it really comes down to that for the longest time, especially in OT, and it's not just OT, manufacturing, even mainframe, things like that, right? Is you really leaned upon the vendor. So in OT, a control system, I would just go to the vendor. The vendor would, back in the day, it was a proprietary box that the vendor designed, and it wasn't anything commercially off the shelf, right? And it was that security by obscurity. We don't need to worry about that because our protocols aren't the same, it's not network connected. But then this whole shift happened in OT, and it really started from the vendors. They realized that it was cheaper and easier for them to just go buy hardware off the shelf and put their software on it. So these companies went from being hardware companies to really being software companies. Yeah. And they're just grabbing a Dell server or an HP server, an IBM, whatever the hardware platform is. They're throwing Windows OS on top of it. They're grabbing a Cisco switch. They're grabbing a Palo Alto firewall or whatever, Cisco ASA or whatever firewall that they're having. But they don't have anybody with expertise to design an architecture that supports all that stuff. So they're still focused on their platform, their control system, their automation and that kind of stuff. And then they just kind of say, they do the basics, setting basic firewall.
Next finish.
Exactly. Right. But then when you go, hey, well, as an organization, like we standardize on this platform and this switching environment, and we don't do Hyper-V, we use VMware or Citrix or whatever. And the vendor's like, oh, no, we don't support that. And what reason is because they haven't done any R&D in it. So there's no way they can support every option. So I have two choices. I can either stick with what the vendor has and hope that they know what they're doing, or I can take the responsibility and re-architect it, which I've been on both sides of that. But the problem with that is if it breaks, it's kind of like putting aftermarket parts on your car. They will not support it anymore. So it's fine until it breaks, and then they're like, you modified it, it's your problem.
Exactly. Best of luck. Yeah, and I've seen that, and we see that play into software as well, where people go, okay, I can buy this software package, or I could build it. Or I could take the off-the-shelf one and modify it. And it's like, if you do that, that's great. You probably get what you want, and it may be more secure, but you now own it. You've touched it. It's yours, right? So now you need to maintain it. You need people on staff who understand it and that sort of stuff. And that's a whole, sort of ball of wax most people don't want to deal with. But the other thing is then you need to worry about the vendor. You're absolutely right. The vendor understanding what they're doing and how to architect, whether it's software or a hardware solution or both combined, to do the right thing. And what I typically see from supply chain is the most important thing to them is to take all these COTS, parts and whatnot, put them together and then put them in a shiny box and then paint it with their logo on it. That's the most important thing. It's like, no, this is a custom thing you can't get anywhere except for us. And you open the box and you're like, okay, I can get all these pieces. And none of them are configured the way they should be. So, that's frustrating too, because when we start to see all these supply chain attacks, right? And we've been sort of digging in, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. We've been digging into like, okay, so if I break into this piece of software or this web, hosting platform or this whatever, now we have access to 2,500 customers, and we've seen this as sort of a vector now from nation states, right? Why would I target, an individual company when I could target, log me in and that will get me access to every company, right?
Correct.
So yeah, that's frustrating too, because we go down that path and so I could tell you actually, we were just doing an audit of a system. It was, how do I put this without telling you what the system is? Let's say it's a restaurant system.
Sure.
So, and let's say there's 10,000 restaurants using this system. And the user, like a chef, has the ability to upload a picture of a cheeseburger. And we found the ability to, because the login to this system is only 4 digits with no password. So not hard to get into. So we get into the system as a chef and we're able to upload this picture. And the picture, there's no checking to see whether it's actually a picture. So we're able to access the entire backend, right? We upload code instead of a picture. It runs the code. And the vendor, when they said, when you install this restaurant system, you need to install it as a domain admin or a local administrator. You need to install it on a system with no antivirus. And you need to make sure that it has access to everything. So the moment we get in, we're like, wow, it's keys to the kingdom.
I'm God.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we can do anything. We could ransomware the whole network. We could do whatever we want at this point. And you go to the customer we're working with and they're like, wow, that sounds really bad. But they're a restaurateur. They're like, okay, DA. Okay. Right? But they go, okay, well, the best place to refer you is probably the software vendor, right?
Sure.
That this you should do. So, we go to the software vendor and they say to us, okay, and? We're like, what do you mean, and? Like, this is huge. And they're like, it's not a feature. Did the customer ask us to fix this? And we're like, nope, but you got to fit. It's just like 2,500 restaurants right now. And they're like, okay, maybe they should have a better firewall. And we're like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, yeah. So you get those frustrations too, where you're like, oh, I wish the industry would just wake up and take these suggestions.
So that's a great conversation piece, right? So this restaurant is not, they're focused on selling cheeseburgers, right?
Right.
And they don't have a huge cyber budget. They're leaning on their vendors to do what they think is right. They trust their vendor because their vendor is the best at this restaurant software, right? Yeah. But they don't know that maybe the other software alternative out there that maybe not as feature rich, maybe they have better security, but they're not looking at, and you said it earlier, right? Is security is an add-on, it's a bolt-on, it's a cost center. So there's all these costs, and you see it a lot is we've done it this way for 40 years. We've done it this way for 10 years or whatever. And it's hard to get and justify security as part of the conversation.
Right.
Secure by design. It's why the whole DevSecOps, revolution and the way that we talk about things, we're putting in that sec word because it's supposed to be part of the development. It's not supposed to be, okay, dev team created this widget. Oh, wait, how do I secure it? And you try to find a way to secure it instead of including security in the beginning when I'm creating this widget, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you say that because we see this all the time when we get engaged at the usually the worst possible moment. So we're an offensive team, right? We're designed to break into an organization and tell you where your weaknesses are and make suggestions on fixing it. And a lot of times, like, we'll be engaged with the customer. There's one, it was a lead, not a customer at the time we were talking to. And we had engaged them and we started talking to them about one of their platforms. And we said, listen, there's this other platform over here. We really need to look at that. It feels shaky. Feels like just looking at it, like even when you've been in the industry as long as Aaron and I have, like, you look at a system and you go, ooh, yeah, like, I don't know if I would touch that. So, we look over there and we go, ooh, yeah, you know what? We should look at that. We should. Yeah. And they go, yeah, no, at some point. Yeah, absolutely. And we're like, you know what? We'll just add it into this project. We'll take a look at it. No. At some point, we'll take a look at it. At some point, take a look at it. And then I get a call Friday night. This is probably 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And they're like, hey, Duane. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, hey, what's up? And they're like, that system you said you wanted to look at? I was like, yeah. They're like, you mind looking at it now? Because it got ransomware. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, guys, it's been 2 months. We've been talking to you about how shaky these systems are. So, that's the frustration too, is, coming into, you're absolutely right. The design is always features. And then somebody takes a look at it afterwards and goes, how do we make it secure? It's like designing an entire car, right? It has the fastest engine. It's super streamlined. It's in the prettiest color you possibly could imagine. And then they go, okay, so, hey guys, you want to come in now and make sure people don't die in it? And you're like, no, we should have done that at the beginning design, but nobody does that.
Maybe you shouldn't have made it have 2,000 horsepower and go 0 to 60 in 1 second with no seat belts.
Oh my gosh. So it's insane. We see that a lot, but it brings up a good point. So take this restaurant example. So, okay, let's say I own a restaurant and I'm really savvy about technology and I'm taking a look at all these different restaurant softwares. I may not understand what the differences in security are. So I think software vendors need to be better about, hey, we do code reviews. Hey, we make sure that, we're patching constantly. We're always, we have, secure development lifecycle on staff. So there should be a standard between software that makes it easy for someone who's not in our industry understand what are the steps that are being taken here. But now take things that are more touching in the OT world or IoT world, like we don't see that often. One of the examples, I can't remember if I had told you about, was a TV. Did I tell you the TV story?
I don't know.
No, I'll tell you the TV story. So we had one organization we were breaking into, and they knew we were breaking into it, and they wanted to cheat fair and square. So we actually have devices we've built that allow us to break into Wi-Fi.
Sure.
So we had devices we were, trying to break into Wi-Fi, and they knew we were going to be coming over Wi-Fi. That was our initial vector. So the manager came and said, listen, there's going to be a red team, attacking the organization. Chances are they're going to be hitting Wi-Fi first. Every 24 hours, let's change our Wi-Fi password. Just like out of the blue, like, you know what, we're just going to keep changing it. We're just going to keep changing it. And that way they won't get in, and we'll get an A+, the green check mark. We've done a great job. And, lo and behold, the first day we get near site, we grab a hash for the password. We crack it. It was relatively weak. Well, I say relatively weak. We have a crack cluster in the office that can guess 3 billion passwords a second for wireless.
Right.
So relatively weak is like anywhere between 8 and 12 characters we can guess within 24 hours.
Yeah.
So we guess the password, we get on the network. And we get on the network and we're looking around. The first thing we look for is what's called persistence. We want to stay on that network and stay undetected. Right. We don't go in loud. We don't start spraying around and try and, grab everything. You very carefully look for your targets. And we found an IoT device. We found a TV connected. So we're like, okay, cool. And we started messing around with this TV. What we did is we actually bought the same TV and we then tore it down to its parts, all the circuit boards out, took the firmware, pulled it off with a bus pirate. I don't know if you've ever used a bus pirate. Those are fun devices. So we pull the firmware off. We find that there's actually an exploit that allows us to connect to the Android debug port.
Okay.
So we connect back into the network, connected the Android debug port, and we put a small piece of code on there that reaches out to us to tell us the Wi-Fi password, just in case they kick us off. So the next day, we can't get on the wireless. Sure enough, the TV reaches out and says, oh, by the way, here's the new password, and gave us the new password. So they, at the end of the engagement, they're like, how did you guys get on every 24 hours? We're like, you guys were really diligent about putting that lobby TV back on the Wi-Fi as soon as you change that password. And they're like, oh, man. So, things like that. Like, okay, let's say, you and I own a business and we want to put that shiny TV in the lobby. How do we know what the TV vendor has done to be secure, right? I was even talking to you about, I have a podcast, securitythisweek.com, and I have a co-host, and we've been doing this for, a year and a half, almost 2 years, where we're talking about security, and we started talking about IoT, and he's like, oh, thank God I don't have any IoT in my house. And I was like, what? What did you just say? And he's like, I don't have any IoT. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's like, you don't have a TV? He's like, well, I got a TV. I was like, do you stream stuff to it? He's like, oh yeah, I stream stuff to it. I'm like, well, then you have IoT. Like, it's connected. It is a thing that's connected to the internet. And he's like, yeah, but it's okay. It's okay. Because when I'm not watching it, I shut it off. And I was like, wait a second. How do you shut it off? No, like, legitimately, how do you shut it off? And he's like, I just push the power button on the remote. I'm like, that doesn't shut it off, right? He's like, what? I was like, next time, go to your TV and hold the power button for 10 seconds. And it'll ask you, do you really want to shut the TV off?
Right.
Next time you hit the power button, you're going to see it go through that whole Google Android boot screen that takes about 4 hours. And that's why it never shuts off. So, I think as a business, even as personal, it's hard to know, like, what devices are up? What are they responding to? What are they listening to? Like, how exploitable are they? When's the last time you patched your TV?
Right.
I don't know. Right. So
it's so hard for again, we do this and we have been doing this for years, and it's our job and we focus on it. And, we both have a podcast. We're talking about topics. We're constantly looking at new threats and vulnerabilities, et cetera. And, I grew up in a networking and, being a network admin and creating and architecting networks. So my home network is more complex than probably a lot of businesses. Like, I've got like 6 wireless access points and multiple SSIDs, and they change all the time. And, I change
VLANs and
VLANs and firewalls and and all this different stuff. So when I bring on an IoT device, I'm putting it on a specific network. And I have firewall rules that restrict access, and I can get to it, but it can't get out, and all of those things. But I am in the less than 1% minority probably in the world of how complex. And the problem with that is when I travel and it goes down, my wife and family are just like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, so I have a procedure that I can try to walk them through, rebooting certain things, powering off, did you turn it off and on again, right? But again, most people sign up for cable modem or fiber or whatever, and the solution provider brings them a router that has built-in Wi-Fi, and it's set with the default admin right there on the box, and they don't change it. And they don't know how, because it's complex and it scares them. And then they go buy the TV and they plug it in, and they buy the thermostat, and they buy the Amazon device, and they have all this IoT, and it's commingled with their work laptop. So I'm an employee of a company and I bring my work laptop and I plug it in that network. Well, what I just did is I connected that laptop to all these devices that can then put malware or any other thing on it. And then I carry that laptop with me to the office and plug it in to the network, bypassing all of those other security, controls to stop outside people from coming in the firewall. So the firewall stops everybody, but I just bypassed it.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, because that scenario just played out at LastPass.
Right.
Like, LastPass got breached, and they're tracking this breach down, and it came to a particular engineer at his house. Hackers were able to compromise his Plex server. So he has for those of you on the podcast who may not, be the technophiles that Aaron and I are, you have a Plex server, it shares up only home movies, nothing else that you would pull off the internet, but only home movies.
No. Right.
Of course not. And if you don't patch that constantly, there is an exploit where you could upload do a mobile upload of a video, and the codec would buffer overrun, and then you'd get control over the Plex server. So from there, they started controlling the network and were able to compromise his personal desktop. And then when he went to log in and start doing things at work, sure enough, that's how they compromised it. So, take LastPass, who probably spends, I don't know, I'm swag guessing here, but 10 million, 50 million in cybersecurity.
Probably, yeah.
This guy does not spend 50 million in cybersecurity at his house. And you know, you and I, right? VLANs, multiple firewalls, like IoT, like I have an
YubiKeys,
wireless. Yeah, exactly. Right. Most people don't do that. And it's even apparent with this particular engineer where it's like, oh no, just his work desktop was connected to where he's watching movies, which is connected to the rest of the family. So, you know, that level of security, it's tough to protect against as an organization because now you need to extend into the home and understand those things. And sometimes it's not even the employee's fault.
right?
There was one, so in our red teaming, sometimes we're given the latitude to move even further than just the company, where they say, listen, all of our employees, it depends on the organization, right? Military organizations, certain types of banks and embassies, that sort of stuff, where they say, no, all of our employees have signed a contract that says if they're working from home, then it is an asset that we can check to make sure that it's secure. So it comes under our purview.
Sure.
And we had one company we were attacking, and man, the defenders at this company are awesome. Like, it's rare, and not to like toot our own horn, but it's rare that we won't break into a company. And I say that not because like, oh my God, we're the best of the best of the best. It's just because it's so hard to protect. Like,
Sure.
I can fail 1,000 times attacking a company, but I just need to succeed once.
Yep.
And the defenders need to get it right every single time. And if they miss it once, I'm in, and I look like a hero, and they look like they don't know what they're doing, and that it's just terrible.
Yep.
So these defenders were doing awesome. I mean, like everything we threw at them was like, nope, couldn't get in. And we start looking at the employees, and we went. So you were talking about how your ISP gives you those little, modems that you plug in, and it gives you wireless and all that good stuff. Well, a lot of those, like either Cox or Xfinity or whoever, they also give a guest network, right? So if I'm an Xfinity customer, I can go anywhere Xfinity has these boxes. If there's an Xfinity customer near me, and I can connect into their box, giving my username and password, and then I get internet access. It's awesome, right? And I can get internet access almost anywhere. It's a benefit of being, a Cox customer or an Xfinity. And in this particular case, what we found is when we connected into the guest network on this device, yet again, took the device, tore it down to its firmware. We found out when we connected in, you get a DHCP address, right? So that's how you're going to get an address on the network, get a DHCP address. In that DHCP request for us to get an address, we could buffer overrun the host name. And it gave us a super user prompt on the box. Then we could then move over to the internal network. So you go, okay, cool. Like now we have access to not only this particular guy, actually probably every, ex ISP, home user, all because the ISP thought, hey, this will be a great idea, right?
Sure.
We'll just use the boxes that are already there. Now, is that the employee's fault? No. You know what I mean? They trusted that their ISP gave them a box that was secure. And a lot of people think, listen, if my ISP wanted to, look at all my traffic, they could. It's going through them, right?
Sure.
So I trust the devices they give me. So it's tough, I think, from a personal standpoint to even protect against those things, because nobody's going to do what you and I would do, where we're like, hey, I bought this new refrigerator, let me take it apart and read the firmware. And my wife's like, you touch that thing, I will kill you.
But and I think the important thing, the message that I want to come out of this is, even you and I, as sophisticated as our home networks are, does not mean that we can't be attacked, and does not mean that we won't be attacked and that we're not vulnerable. Like, I constantly get alerts that, hey, your password showed up in on a dark website. Like, awesome. So I'll go change it. Like, it's not a big deal to me because I compartmentalize. I never use the same password twice, like all of those check boxes, right? That does not mean that somehow they didn't get into LastPass and DHS and all these other websites that have me, in all these different places. And you have to be constantly doing it. And it's tiring and it's frustrating.
Yes.
And there's no silver bullet. I can't just put a firewall. I can't just, sign up for LastPass, which just breaks my heart because I was a LastPass customer for a long time. And the first attack and then the second attack. And then finally I was like, come on, guys. Like, I can't continue to support this. Like, come on,
get it together.
Killing me.
Yeah, we were the same way. We were, when the first attack came out, we said, listen, a lot of it's hype. They're doing the right things. That they've got to be encrypting all the right things. Like, to stay the course. And then when the second attack came out, we're like, okay. And then the third information starts leaking out, and we're like, okay, ship's going down. Like, you gotta go somewhere else. I don't know what to tell you.
But most people, they'll use the browser, and Google's really good about sharing, hey, we'll do all your passwords for you, which I just, whatever, but they don't know what to do. And it's the same thing in OT, right? Is you walk into a control room and the password is on a sticky note sitting right by the monitor. But in an OT space, it's not just like that's a big problem, because it's like, okay, the password, yes. Or most control rooms, the operator, the logins, they don't have passwords. Or they have a password, but they never log out, because my availability to be on that act, if something's happening and I need to be able to control it, I don't want a password slowing me down. Now, to say they also have cameras, they have security guards. I can't get into that room. There's multiple layers that I have to get to even get in that space.
Yes.
But I'm knowing that and documenting that. So, a red teamer comes in and says, oh, well, these things have no password. Like, yes, but here's the other mitigations that I've done and we monitor those things to only be able to do so you have to put all of those things in. You can't just say no password, have a nice day, right? And never pay attention to it again.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I was doing an engagement for a 3-letter government agency, which I won't tell you which one, but
sure.
And I was on their secure side of the network, and there were no passwords for the computers. It was like administrator, password. And I was like, this is terrible. And they're like, you don't get it. If somebody gets to where you are, they're either, got bullet holes riddled in them, or they're not going to last here long. So it's okay if they're in this small room. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, nobody's just coming in here and typing a password. So you do have to take that whole picture, right? Okay, how easy is it to get to, access this particular system, and how much security you possibly need, and what's the detriment? There's always a trade-off. I mean, we've learned that computers have always been a trade-off. There's always a time-space trade-off. There's always a whatever. And the trade-off here is convenience versus security, right? How convenient is it to access the system versus how secure is it? And the more secure you make it, the less convenient. And some people think, well, convenience is I'm making it a little bit less convenient for my users. But if you're talking about launching nukes or not launching nukes, or shutting down a power grid or not shutting down a power grid, convenience may be actually important, right? The speed at which you can respond there makes sense. So yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. It's tough to keep track of even in our own homes. And I'm the same way. Like, my family's like, I don't even know how to turn on the TV if you're gone and the network goes down, right? So, but kids are amazing. Like, I lock down all my kids' laptops, and I'm the administrator, they're not, and I have Microsoft Family make sure they can only go to certain sites and that sort of stuff. And one day I came in and I saw my son on his laptop, and he's just on some random site. And I'm like, what did you do? He's like, I noticed that laptop was really restrictive, so I just reinstalled the OS. And I was like, right? So even in my own network, I'm like, I don't even know, right? So yeah, no, it's crazy. It's hard to keep it all protected.
So as a business owner, that use case you used a minute ago, I think that's a great conversation to have, right? I'm a business owner. I know a little bit about technology or whatever, but if I'm launching a new business, every penny matters, and I have to make decisions. And every business, whether it's a small business, a medium-sized business, or the largest businesses in the world, they're all making risk-based decisions at every corner. Okay, I can choose this path, or this path. They're not going to be experts in all of those, but they're making the best decision they can, right? Yep. So as we approach these things, it's not like they're lazy. It's not like they're ignorant. Mm-hmm. There's just no way you can be an expert in all these things. So how can we help get this message out that what decisions do they make? Who do they need to help? How do they make the right decisions? And there is no right decision, but how do they make better decisions around these choices, and making sure that they're holding their vendors accountable? They're holding their internal people accountable. They're holding themselves accountable for making sure that security is part of the conversation, and they don't just say, well, I didn't know, that right. When my 13-year-old says, well, I didn't know, I'm like, come on, man. Like,
you knew. That's not an answer. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a part of it, you and I have talked before, but a part of it is, why we started our podcasts. It's really to take all of cybersecurity is like insurance. You can buy as much as you want, but how much do you really need, right? Yeah. So it's the same thing here is, we try and distill that information down to what are the basics you could ask a supply chain vendor, a piece of software you're purchasing or whatnot. Like, do you do code reviews? That'd be a great question to ask anybody you're buying code from, right? An OT device, have you had a security review done on this device, right? Simple question to ask. And if the answer is, maybe we double think, whether we use this device or not.
Yep.
And I think, part of it is this field moves so fast. You're right. You can't be an expert in this and other things. Like, ask me to go manage the books for our company and, like cold sweats, because like, that's just not where I am.
Yeah.
But if you want me to like take a Tesla and tear it down to, its base parts and then start reading firmware and understanding how to break into it. Yeah. Okay. Like, that's where I focus. But a lot of people go, oh my gosh, that's so deep.
Right.
So you and I have gone like really deep into the, security aspect of the world, but we can't be experts in everything. So one of the recommendations I make is like, listen, if you're a restaurateur or you're, pharma company or your military, you guys do what you do really well and focus on what you do, but be able to reach out to experts who understand that, that piece of it and leverage the community of experts. Like say, hey, listen, what do you think of this piece of software? And I think that's kind of an important thing. Like when you start to, if you're a development company, when you start developing, engage security people to see, how do we do this in a secure way? When you're architecting new networks or OT environments, engage a security person and say, how's the most secure way for us to implement this? Because that, doing a little bit of that up front is going to be better than later on down the line, either being breached and then bringing somebody in to clean up the mess, or trying to go, okay, great, we have this amazing product / power grid / whatever. Now let's secure it, because, that costs a lot more money and you're going to miss things.
Yeah. And human nature is to, kind of avoid, ignore, whether it be your fitness, you always think it's not me. Like that happens to somebody else, you see on the 8 o'clock or the 5 o'clock news or whatever, and, somebody got mugged or the car got stolen or, Bob had a heart attack or whatever. That's always like, oh, I feel bad for them. But you don't envision yourself in that. Most people don't envision themselves in that situation until it happens to you or somebody that you know. When you come home and your front door is wide open and everything you have is stolen, then you start caring about security. And unfortunately, I see a lot of it takes an incident before these organizations and people really start taking it seriously. You get a ransomware attack or your email hacked or a phishing attack or, somebody breaks in and steals all of your data like, LastPass and any number of these things before they start saying, hey, how do we pivot from this? And what do we need to do and really focus on cyber?
So I love that observation. And here's why. And it's just clicking for me as a red teamer. Like, we're hired thieves. Right. And I didn't even think about it in this manner. Like, I always think, oh, companies hire us to come in and show them specific flaws, right? Oh, right. We were able to break in through this website and we owned the entire network, right? And you go, okay, well, we'll fix this one website, right? And we're good. We're done.
Yeah.
But I do see the trickle down effect from that, where organizations go, oh my gosh, that was really scary. These guys walked in and the door was open and they stole everything. And we hired them to do that, but we really should look at other things. And like I said, it's interesting you say that. I've definitely noticed in a lot of our customers, they go, oh my gosh, well, what about this site? What about this site? And if we thought about it over here, and it does change that paradigm, it's almost like it'd be great if you could hire a thief to come to your house and break in, and then you're like, wow, that sucked. Okay, what do we do to protect it, or know that somebody came by or whatever? Yeah. Now, I mean, even things like at my house, like I have wireless monitoring at my house. And people go, okay, why are you watching wireless? You think somebody's going to break in your house? And well, actually, maybe. But even if a thief were to break into my house, like I want to pick up all the things that their device is probing for. What networks do they normally connect to? What, can I profile their device and that sort of stuff and get a little bit of information, right? But understanding like, how are you protected? How are you monitoring? What are you looking for? Like, hiring somebody to break in. That's my advice, Aaron. Hire somebody to break into your house and then
check with your wife first. Don't let it be a surprise, especially in Texas, because you may get shot.
Yeah, there's that. New Hampshire too. So,
exactly. Well, awesome, man. So, man, I think we could talk for hours, like we said before, but the final question I always ask my guests, right, is in the next 5 to 10 years, what is something that you're hopeful for and maybe something that's concerning on the landscape for cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I'm hopeful for is we start to see more intelligent systems. So, lots of cybersecurity software vendors out there are talking about, we use AI, we use machine learning, we use AI, and most of that's BS. But I think, as we start to see things like, ChatGPT and that sort of stuff, we'll start to see quasi-intelligent systems defending networks. And I'm hopeful for that, because The problem is a human being is like, I can't keep track of everything, right?
Yeah.
I can't watch all the logs. I can't make sure that we're responding fast enough in an appropriate way. I can't look at the global nature of what's going on. So I think you'll start to see, I'll call it AI just to call it AI, but it's not AI,
Sure.
right? More intelligent software systems for defending networks. So, that's what I'm hopeful for. That's where I think we'll go is we've seen we can't just keep throwing training at users, and they're going to get marginally better, but they're not going to get, infinitely better. And you can't dedicate your lives to this like you and I do, right? People have day jobs. They have to do other things. So I think systems have to take that place, like intelligent systems and, processes, of course, like DevSecOps and that sort of stuff.
Right.
The thing I'm most scared of is artificial intelligence on the other side, right? I can tell you there's constantly, even with Chat GPT, I don't know if you played with that at all.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much fun. I'll write a virus because we'll want to break into a company. I can, most of the EDRs out there, the antivirus and that sort of stuff, we can write viruses to bypass. They're not that hard.
Yeah.
Windows Defender, probably the hardest and free.
Right.
It's amazing how hard that one is.
Yeah.
It takes me a week to craft the custom, lovingly bake a virus that will not be picked up. And the moment I use it, it gets burned. The whole world knows about it.
Yep.
But now I go to ChatGPT and I say, hey, can you take this virus and rewrite it in Golang for me or Rust? And it's like, oh yeah, it spits it out for me and then I can run it again. So I think, there's some of those where we're just dipping a toe in, intelligent systems. I can't imagine 10 years from now where, you have these systems that can respond so fast that just human defenders won't be able to block an account fast enough or respond to it fast enough. So that would be my fear is, we start to see these intelligent systems and somebody then flips them to, okay, how would I get it to attack faster, more strategically, spread across the network more? How do I attack all the employees' homes at once? Right? You could do that with these types of systems. That's my fear is, okay, yeah, we're going to develop these things that are going to protect in a sort of an AI way, but more in an intelligent way. But you're also going to get attack systems that do that as well. So it's always the arms race, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be there forever.
Yeah. And to your point though, is how can we compete with that if we're not using it on the offensive side and the defensive side? So we have to understand what the attack vectors are, which means we need red teamers to be using AI to try to get in. So, again, I think the focus is not to stop them from getting in, but to be able to recognize that they got in and be able to shut them down quickly before they get a toehold, before they have that persistence in your environment and they're there for 10 years or 20 years and you don't even know it. And they're sending the passwords, they're bypassing all of your security controls and all those types of things. That's the goal, is to know that they're there, know a change happened, know what your assets are. I mean, the scary thing in the OT world is most environments, if you walk in and I asked the owner or the CIO or the whomever, do you have an understanding of all of the devices that you have, where they are, what firmware level they're at? They're like,
Nope.
I know. I can pull you the list that we bought from 10, 20 years ago. I have no idea where they're sitting, who owns them, what IP address they are, what firmware they are they updated? Are they still even plugged in? I have no idea.
Yes. Yeah.
And how do you defend something that you don't understand the landscape? You have to have better, and that's just like a foundational understanding of cyber before I ever bolt any tools on or anything. I need to understand what I have so I know where my vulnerabilities could even possibly come from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the next question we usually ask after the, hey, do you know what you have is, okay, listen, I understand you got sprawl everywhere. What would you want to protect? What's the most important thing? If you lost it today, you'd be out of business. And a lot of times we get the answer of, I don't know. And you're like, oh my gosh, so I don't know what hill I'm defending. I don't know what troops I have.
Just defend it armed. Good luck. I got one guy, one gun, and a whole army of people coming at me, and I don't know where they're coming from.
Good luck. No, it's crazy. And, a lot of the paradigm we see people trying to shift to or should shift to is assume breach. And it's that you're absolutely right listen, if an attacker wants to break into your organization, they will. I don't care how secure you are, they will break in. So you got to assume breach. You got to have those layers and be able to know, okay, when they get through this wall, I know how I'm going to stop them here. And when they get through past the moat, I know how I'm going to stop them here, right? Yep. And have that plan.
And I know what to look for. I know what normal, I know you have to know what good looks like to be able to find bad. That's another piece, right?
Yeah, where you're looking through logs and you're like, hey, is this normal? And they go, oh. You're like, oh, gosh, I don't know either. So maybe it is.
Exactly. So, hey, talk about your podcast. What's the call to action? How do they get a hold of you, listen to your stuff?
Yeah.
More conversations like this.
Sure, absolutely. So our podcast airs every week. It's securitythisweek.com. And it's, my partner who's a West Point graduate, tank commander in the Gulf War, physical security. His answer is usually we should send a Tomahawk over and kill all the hackers. There's me who's sort of the deep, tech firmware, red teamer. And then we have our guy, Carl Franklin, he's the guy who slows us down to okay, stop throwing out acronyms. What's that mean, right? He's a brilliant developer, but not in the cyber space.
Right.
And it started with him going, I want to know more about cyber. You got to come in and let's talk. And we said, hey, let's do this as a podcast. And
sure,
we've been doing it for 2 years. So we take all the stories of the week, the hype and the not hype, and we break it down. Like, what happened at LastPass? Should you be worried? What are the things you should do now, just so we can educate people? That's the call to action. Just try and stay on top of it if you can, and listen to podcasts like yours and like ours to stay on top of it.
Awesome. We'll definitely link in the show notes for the website, all that kind of stuff. And thank you very much for coming on. I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure we'll probably do this a couple more times and dive into some specific topics, maybe on an OT incident or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And next time I'll have to tell you about the Simian Army. I'm going to leave you with just that. We'll talk about the Simian Army next time.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.